Good afternoon. What a delight to be here, and of course, to have Anne-Marie in conversation. I'm sure none of you have read her article. Even in the green room, she gets stopped by people saying, I've read your article, it meant so much to me, it spoke to me. And I think that's where I want to start, which is, you've written 6 books, written or edited 6 books. I am going to go out on a limb and say that not a single one of them has received the attention or the scrutiny from large numbers of people globally that this piece has. And now you're working on a book to come out next year from Random House.
Right.
You got a lot of questions about the title of this piece. And I wonder if you could talk about the title of the Atlantic piece and how you're approaching the book.
Okay. So yes, first of all, you're right. It is a little distressing to have spent 20 years working in foreign policy, and you Google me, and it would take you many pages to discover that I actually wrote things other than about work-family balance. But, you know, I don't normally write in the Atlantic either, so partly it's a function of where you write. So the title... I went back and forth with the Atlantic over the title. I originally wanted Women Can't Have It All Yet. And my idea was to say, look, which is the point of the piece, having it all, in my view, means having the same work and family choices as men do. It's that simple. It doesn't mean having everything you want. Nobody has everything they want. Nobody should have everything they want. That's not, that's fairy tales. But it was, in the 70s, the idea was a woman could have a career, just like a man could have a career, and have a family as she'd always had a family. And that was having it all. And I wanted to say, look, that is still very hard, and here's what has to change so that we can do that. And the Atlantic felt that that title was more like The End of Men. In other words, it sounded, and they had just published The End of Men. So we went back and forth and back and forth. But honestly, I did not realize, and it shows my age, that having it all to a younger generation would be treated very, very differently than for my generation. And I'm certainly not going to call the book that or anything remotely close to that. And I don't really use it anymore because it is, as Rebecca Traister said in Salon, it's very easy for people who weren't involved in the debates in the 70s and the 80s to say these are very privileged women who just want everything and they're whining and this is not actually an important social issue.
When you think about the book, where do you see this discussion going? Because clearly the reason to do the book is because so many people have downloaded this article, right? So 1 million readers plus.
1.7.
There you go, heading toward 2. And really the most read piece in the Atlantic, which, by the way, is not known for huge discussions about work-life balance previously. Right? I mean, it really has created a cottage industry within the Atlantic and within media.
Yes.
Right? So where do you see this discussion going, which your book will hope to lead?
Well, the first thing I want to do is give voice to so many of the people who wrote to me. I mean, I have 1,000+ emails just that were sent to me personally before I took my email off the web because I was dying, but also if you just trolled, obviously the chats, the discussions, and all the different blogs, and so many of these stories are so powerful. I mean, a woman just stopped me in the green room and said, when I read your article, and she said, well, I cried a little. And many of the emails that I get start with, I cried when I read your article, and then they go on to tell me their story. And they're from women of all different walks of life, all different ages. It's a much more diverse group than you might expect. And they're all about, I came out of school, I had these ambitions, I wanted to try to make it all work, and somewhere along the line, I just couldn't do it. A child got sick, a spouse got sick. I have women writing me saying, well, I think if I got up at 4 in the morning instead of 5, maybe I could put it together, or describing, what a day is like, and then saying, in the end, I had to compromise, and now I feel like I've failed. And I want to have a book that opens the door to many more stories, and also tells men's stories, and that's a very big part of it. And then I want to focus on all the actual solutions, because the other thing that's happened is I've discovered just how many companies out there, how many women out there, how many men out there are making it work with all sorts of policies that I think if you broadened would go a long way toward making it easier to have both children and parents. So, and then I probably will tie it to America's place in the world, because that is, in the end, my home business.
Right. You actually do have a day job, which is
I do.
teaching and writing about foreign policy in the U.S. You have written that you want to see change that values the results out rather than hours in.
Yes.
What 2 or 3 solutions, as you see it, and as you talk to people who are doing innovative things, who are wrestling with these questions about how to work and have a career and have a family also, that you think would be short-term to medium-term real solutions?
Well, the first is absolutely, I mean, the simplest would be you get together with the folks in your office, you decide there is a key part of the day where people are going to be in the office, so let's say 10 to 2 or 10 to 3, after kids go to school and before kids come home, and those hours are when you schedule meetings. Now, I understand this doesn't work for every career, but it works for a lot of them, because we all have a lot of stuff that we can actually do on our own, connected. And then the rest of the time, it's up to you as to where you work and when you work. And I have been able to do versions of this both at the State Department, which you might not expect, and certainly in the Wilson School. Another version of this, actually, the Pentagon does, which is amazing, but Michelle Flournoy, the highest woman in the Pentagon, she had a policy where every 10th day you had off. So every 10th day, you could schedule your doctor's appointments, go do all the things that you now try to cram in on the weekend with your kids. You could schedule it with your kids. If you had young kids, you could, plan to be with them. So there are a bunch of things like that I think are essential. But the second is absolutely, my view is, if you get your work done, I really don't care how long it takes you. In fact, if it takes you less time, I think you're productive. You're managing your time well. So, get me that report, do that project, meet with the client, but that's what I want to judge you on, not how long you were in the office. And the last thing is just playing the long game, right? The thinking about this in terms of people who are happy and healthy and productive over time, rather than people who are going to burn out and drop out because you squeeze them completely dry. And that's a national issue. That's not just a women's issue or a men's issue. We have done everything we can to make ourselves more productive for less, and that's not going to work longer term. So that's the other thing, is really taking a longer view.
On the solutions discussion, we never get far without talking about men.
Yes.
Right? You can't have children.
Well.
Right? Right, in some shape or form.
Right, I was gonna say.
And the question is, how do you see men playing a role in the solutions, and what kind of reaction have you gotten? Because I know, even just among the people I knew, a lot of men would say, well, look, it's really tough for men, too. They can't have it all.
Yeah, no, that. I've gotten 3 categories of responses, and a lot of them I describe are women who are very grateful. Then there's this criticism category, and there's plenty in that. And then the third category is from men, and there are 2 kinds. There a lot from fathers, and those are really interesting, because those are fathers who say, I don't know what they thought when they were having kids early on with their wives, but now they watch their daughters making trade-offs that they're not happy about. But the other category are from guys, and they say absolutely. They say, yes, it's hard for women, but try being a man who takes paternity leave, who asks for flex time, who says, I've got to leave at 6 to pick up my kids, who says to the guys, no, I'm not going to the bar and having a drink afterwards. I'm going home to take care of my kids. The gender stereotyping against those guys is, real men don't do diapers. Real men don't do the school run. You are less committed. You're less of a guy. And they feel disadvantaged as well. And so we do definitely have to change this for men as well as women. There's no way to do this just for women.
Well, and that brings in a question about the tension, because you've written that only when women wield power in sufficient numbers will we create a society that genuinely works for all women. And there's definitely a tension between that statement and the fact that women feel like they can't have it all, and so they're opting to take care of their families. And I wonder how you see that, having it all versus ambition tension, and how you reconcile that.
Well, you know, it's particularly for this conference, given its connections to Hollywood, you know, it's really like reimagining roles for older actresses. The only way out of this is to start thinking about a 60-year-old woman as halfway through her life. And increasingly, women will be, our life expectancies are over 80 now, they're moving toward 100. You just can't sort of think, well, unless you made it by 55 or 60, you know, that you're done. You need to think, well, sure, you know, there's a woman, she invests, she gets to a certain place in her career, she takes some time out, she might stop working. Most women don't stop working, they just work differently. But boy, the minute her kids go to college, she is back and ready and experienced, and at that point, she can run for office. My boss is a great example, right? She did not run for the Senate, Hillary Clinton, until Chelsea went to college, until she was out of the House. The House was the White House, but it was still the House. That's very important, right? And she would often look at Cheryl Mills or me or others and just say, boy, you know, I don't know how you do it. She did a ton, but she never tried to be the public figure she has been since, as a senator, as a presidential candidate, as a Secretary of State, until her daughter was actually in college. And that, you know, I look at lots of women who say, boy, if you can work with kids in the house, you take them out, sky's the limit. So that's when I think, but you know, electing older women, not something our society has been accustomed to doing. Indeed, you know, as men get gray, they sort of have authority, and as women get gray, they don't. And that's where we have to change.
Well, and what about the message to younger women? Because you said that if people took this as a message to not be ambitious, you would never have written your piece.
Right.
And what do you say to younger women who come up to you and say, what message should I take from this? I'm 24 and I hear all these people saying you can't have everything, so which direction do I go in?
Well, first place, absolutely you should be ambitious. I mean, you can, I say, you sky's the limit as to what you can accomplish, but you need to be realistic about the fact that children take time. And this is what's so critical, that your own preferences will change. I mean, if you had told me at 25, look, you're going to get to a point where you're going to have the foreign policy job of your dreams, and you could be promoted, and you're going to go home to your kids, I'd have said, you are not talking to me. In fact, I probably would have said that at 35 or 45. So, you know, until my kids were teenagers, it felt very different. You know, when they were little, I thought, well, if I get through this, you know, I send them off to school, and I'm good to go. But, you know, when they're teenagers, it's a whole different thing. They need me, they need both of us, and I'm very aware that I've only got 5 more years with them. So one thing I would say is understand that your own preferences are likely to change. Just as at 25 you may not think about kids at all, by 35 either you're likely to be thinking about them intensively if you haven't had them yet. Let's put it that way. So I counsel that. But more generally, I think it's about imagining what the British call a portfolio career, where, you know, figure out all the things you want to do. I mean, I'm a professor, but what is that really? Well, I write, I speak, I teach, I mentor, and I administer. So I can slice it up into various things. And think about how you combine the things that you do, not your title, but the things you do to get that title, and how those can be combined and recombined over the course of a career in more or less intense settings. I think that's actually good career advice, period, but it's certainly the way I think this generation of women ought to approach their careers.
Well, with that, I'd love to turn to some Q&A. I would imagine that for Anne-Marie, you will certainly have some questions.
Well, congratulations on having twins.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And I guess the question I have is, Christiane Amanpour recently said how she made a choice to delay a relationship and delay marriage because she wouldn't have been able to have the career that she did. And I think she got married and she had a child in her early 40s. Mm-hmm. If you had any advice for women in their early 30s, in the sense of, because I feel like that's sort of a point where, you're at the point of having a really great career, but then you could also get married and it stops. So
it doesn't have to.
No, it doesn't have to, but here's what I would say. I'd say that's a great way to do it if you're prepared to have a family by adopting. And plenty of people are, right? I was with a CEO yesterday who has 2 wonderful daughters, and one's from Kazakhstan and one's from China. My brother has a sort of mixed biological and non-biological family. But be prepared that may be your option, because that's the brutal fact that we have not managed to change. After 35, you are much less fertile. And I'm very candid about saying, at 35, when I got married for the second time, we started trying, and it never dawned on me this might be a problem. By 38, I was a wreck. I was, oh my God, I left it too late, and this is not going to happen. And that isn't a choice I would have made had you given it to me earlier. Had you said to me, you can get tenure, but you won't have children biologically, I would have said, I want to delay my tenure. And so I just think women have to recognize that the numbers are such that I know many women who went through years of fertility treatments and a certain number where it didn't succeed and they would have chosen differently. There are more options. So as I said, it's not that you can't have a family, it's just you better be prepared that it might not be as you imagined it.
Thank you. I want to, first of all, thank you for bringing these issues to the kind of forefront in the national conversation. I think the week that the article came out, I had more people talking to me about these issues and women's issues. I work in women's health than ever before, so that's great. And I just wanted to ask you if you identify as feminist and how you see the message of your article relating to modern political feminist agenda.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I am a proud card-carrying feminist. I would not exist but for feminism. I grew up in Virginia in the 1960s. Women were supposed to be seen but not heard, and preferably seen to be pretty and not heard. I spent high school standing at frat parties trying to act dumb, right? I mean, if it were not for the women ahead of me, the feminist movement, I can't imagine what my life would have been like. I would have been really miserable. And I knew always, as a mother, I have never felt guilty about working because I watched my own mother, who was a wonderful mother, but she's an extremely talented artist. She wanted to go to med school. That was the classic thing. No, you can't go to med school. You're going to get married. So I see this as I see myself as a feminist, and the reason to write this article for me was the next step in what I see as the journey toward genuine equality between men and women, which is to say we've come a long way. So just as parenthetically, my son and I were watching John Kerry speak at the Democratic Convention, and he said, "Who's that?" And I said, well, he's former presidential candidate, he's a senator, and if President Obama wins, he might be Secretary of State. And my son said, without prompting, "You mean a guy can be Secretary of State?" So we've come a long way, and that's great. But just precisely because we've come so far, we can keep going. And what I'm saying is, look, we haven't gotten to the place that having a family is the same for a woman as it is for a man. It is, as the Washington Post or the National Journal puts it, it's a career obstacle for a woman. If you just look at what happens to women's careers once they have families versus what happens to men's careers. So I saw this as a deeply feminist move. I did say at the outset that the feminist assumptions on which I'd built my career were shifting, but that wasn't about feminism, that was about me. And the fact that I suddenly felt differently than I always had, and that led me to look at other women's choices differently.
Hi, my name is Katie. So I had a question about what perplexes me, and that it seems that if women choose to focus more on their career and not have a family, that they are living life, they've lost something along the way. Yet when men get married, they've lost their freedom, they've lost their independence. So I'm curious on your observation of who loses what. And as a young woman, I seriously consider not getting married and not having children, and that seems okay. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
So this is what I want to say in my remarks later, but I'll give you a taste of it. I mean, if feminism means anything, it means women should be free to choose whatever they want, right? So we should no more define women, as mothers or workers, it is absolutely up to women, and that was the point. Men and women are supposed to have equal choices, and ditto, it should be equally available to a man to be a stay-at-home dad. And often, if you've got a very high-powered woman, that's the way it's going to work. And, my husband always says people get excruciatingly uncomfortable if he says, well, my wife makes more than I do. But you know what? If you're really going to have equality, that's got to be able to happen without him being any less a man. So first thing is, if that's your choice, that's your choice. I often say Elena Kagan's a very close friend of mine. She was a year behind me all the way through school at 3 different schools. And, she doesn't have a husband or a family, but she's a Supreme Court justice. That is fantastic. And she is going to leave her mark on American history, and I would not for a minute say that that's not a great choice. But I would also say that I think we have tipped maybe too far in the direction of career, and this is for men and women, as the source of value. And as for women in particular, we didn't want to be valued just because we were somebody's mother or somebody's daughter. But being a mother to me is the most important thing in my life. My kids, my family, as Secretary Clinton once said, that's my real life. There's something wrong when somehow that's less valued. It seems to me we need to get to a place where they're equally valued, and some people will choose both, and some people will choose all family, and some people will choose all work, and that's fine. But for the people trying to do both, I think we still need a recalibration.
While we go to the next question, I want to ask you what your mother thought of the piece.
So she had read it first. My father and mother, both read it. I had a group of women who were reading it, and then my parents had read it. And of course, Virginia, my father literally edited out anything that could have been the least bit controversial. I was like, Dad, the Atlantic really isn't going to publish this. But my mother, it's very interesting, and it's an important question because she was kind of horrified, right? She called and she was like, "What have you done?" Now, part of that was just this tsunami of suddenly as a mother, she was worried that I destroyed my professional identity, as was I. But also, this is her upbringing. Women do not put themselves forward. Not in Belgium in the 50s and not in Virginia in the 60s and the 70s. This sense that I was out there, that I was exposed, that I was controversial. If that had been my brother, I think she'd have had a very different reaction. And that's still something, even now, after all this time, to say as a woman, I'm ambitious, it's a little harder. I think it's harder than for a guy to say it. So some of her reaction is exactly what we still have to fight against, although she's, 100% supportive.
Yeah. Well, it's still a dirty word for a lot of young women.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Adriana Kerzer, and I'm ambitious.
Good.
But I recently caught myself, just yesterday, saying something that shocked me. It was in the middle of an interview, and it ties in very closely with what you talked about in your article. I'm 33. I just got married at 31. If you Google me, it's obvious that I got married. I should ask the New York Times to take it down. So I went into a job interview, and the person said to me, "Oh, it seems like you recently got married. Do you think you're going to have the time that it takes to attend all the social activities that are required of you?" Now, being an ex-lawyer, I knew many layers of that question were wrong. But I wasn't about to tell him that. First mistake, maybe. Second, I need a job. And third, the words that came out of my mouth shocked me till this day. And they were, yes, I got married, but my husband and I don't intend on having kids. I can do the job. And this is not something I am proud of. It's not something that I prepared to say. I was a feminist studies major at Brown. My God, you know. But I said it. And so I wanted to say that and say that thank you because your article gives people like me language to analyze what is wrong about that. And in this tough economy, we need to know, and we need a gendered eye. So I guess my question is how to, after doing something like that, how to recenter oneself and reevaluate, how to move forward.
Wow. So my hat's off to you for the question. Again, I think I've been thinking about this a lot, and so I'm going to give you a half-baked answer because I don't have an answer. It's probably exactly why I want to write the book. So I've been thinking about, I was reading, I was somewhere in People magazine, which my staff used to smuggle to me in a brown paper wrapper. It was like not serious, but it's exactly how I wanted to unwind. And it was somebody, I know, it's Katie Holmes' father. Here we go. So there was something about Katie Holmes and Tom Cruise. I've now ruined my professional identity. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But so here was the thing. So they were talking about how he intervened when this divorce was happening, and everybody was saying, well, his kids have always been the most important thing in the world to him. That was in the magazine. And I thought, how often have I read that about, I remember reading something about Anthony Kennedy. Well, his family's the most important thing in the world to him. And yet you can't say that about a woman, it's hard when I just answered you, that's a hard thing for me to say. And if you listen to me carefully, you'll hear me dancing around, well, it's not more important than my career, but it is. And so, but with a man, nobody doubts his commitment to his career. So to say that his family's the most important thing is in addition, and it says something good and human about him. And that's part of my answer to you is, whoa, we did not take on our professional selves to lose our humanity in the bargain. Indeed, I am a much better leader because I'm a mother. I just am. I mean, the things I have learned as a mother, the whole complex of you and other and responsibility and all of that, and fundamentally it does center me as a human being. Now there are other ways that you don't have to have kids to do that, but I think somehow you have to be able to say, yes, I want kids, and that does not make me any less committed, because that question was assuming that when you have kids, unlike a man, you will be, and that's got to shift. Thank you for asking that question. I hadn't figured that out for myself yet.
Well, as you can see, we are just at the start of an incredible discussion that will continue. And, I think what you writing this piece, you asking the question, women are half the population. We have to exercise that power also, right, to changing the conversation and to reshaping the dialogue, because the numbers are there. It's not like we are a minority. So I will just say that I want to thank you for joining us and for your excellent questions to all of you, and I look forward to the next chapter in the book next year.
Thank you. Thanks, Gail.